He had just helped an elderly couple on a farm resolve their tax issues. Despite owning a massive farm, they could only afford to pay their taxes by maxing out their credit cards every year. The couple was overjoyed and invited Chris to their home for some fishing. However, Chris wasn't fond of fishing. He preferred shooting, and of course, the farm was the perfect place for that. They were deeply grateful to Chris. Meanwhile, at the Financial Crimes Division, Director Kim summoned a female investigator. Director Kim had obtained a sealed file revealing that Medina had attempted murder as a minor and had been sent to a juvenile detention center. Lying about this to get her job was a serious offense. Director Kim intended to use this information to pressure Medina into doing something for him. She pulled out a stack of photos of arrested mob bosses. Though these bosses were already behind bars, one person appeared frequently in the photos, their accountant. Director Kim wanted Medina to find out who this person was. With only 7 months left until his retirement, he was determined to uncover how this accountant managed to work with mob bosses and still walk away unscathed. Director Kim assigned Medina to investigate, instructing her not to involve any other Treasury personnel and to report directly to her. Chris drove home, fried 3 eggs, 3 strips of bacon, and made 3 small pancakes, his dinner. Chris had autism and needed everything to be clean and orderly. On the table were his antidepressants. Every night, he had to listen to heavy metal music, expose himself to bright lights, and rub his calves with a rolling pin. The noise and light were the best ways to prevent a meltdown. Chris recalled his childhood when his mother was about to leave him, his father, and his brother. His parents were arguing loudly outside, and the boy was frantic in his room, unable to understand why his mother was leaving. His brother, however, remained calm. As their mother left, his brother made a gesture, and their father held Chris tightly, reciting the Solomon chant to soothe him. At 10:01 p.m., Chris turned off the noise and lights and took another pill. Chris went to the farm couple's house, set up his sniper rifle, and adjusted the screws on the gun. He aimed at 3 expressionless cantaloupes 1.6 kilometers away. The farmer watched him through binoculars, glanced at the cantaloupes, and chuckled in disbelief. Was this really the same accountant who had saved him money? Chris drove back to another garage where he kept an RV. He stored the sniper rifle in its place. This was his arsenal, fully stocked. He opened a drawer filled with cash and another with gold bars. His collection of priceless artifacts was displayed above his bed in the RV. Every night, he slept under a painting worth hundreds of millions. Chris remembered his time in prison, where he met Francis, who would change the course of his life. They spent every day together, playing chess and watching TV. Francis was an accountant who had laundered money for the mob for 40 years. Over 2 years, Chris learned accounting and how to communicate with people from Francis. He also gained access to all the mob's information. After his release, Chris worked for the underworld. One day, his assistant called with a new job nearby, so he didn't have to take any risks. Chris arrived at the company and asked the CFO how long he had worked there. The CFO was offended, as he and the company's owner were old friends. He thought Chris was being disrespectful, but since the owner had hired him, there was nothing he could do. The next morning, Chris began his work. The female accountant neatly arranged 15 years' worth of ledgers for him. He worked through the night. The female accountant, Dana, was also not very expressive. She only wanted to assist Chris, but she was surprised that he wanted to conduct his own assessment. Dana returned to the accounting department, and their conversation was awkward. Meanwhile, Medina used facial recognition to match a man from a 2006 NYPD surveillance video. The man had used a steak knife to take down 2 thugs, stolen their weapons, and stormed a mob stronghold. He had killed 7 mob enforcers in one go at the Hydra Club, the headquarters of a mob family. His ultimate target was the mob boss's son, Little Tony. Medina rewatched the footage, amazed by the man's clean and fluid movements. They also found an audio file of Little Tony begging for mercy. This was the second time Chris and Dana met. They hadn't planned to eat together but ended up crossing paths. They each carried their food, both awkward in conversation. Chris held a deformed water bottle. After the meal, they parted ways uncomfortably. Chris returned to work, neatly arranging his markers. He filled the whiteboard with notes, his photographic memory allowing him to quickly absorb the information. He then wrote all over the glass walls. Before long, the office was a mess. Medina repeatedly listened to the begging audio, hoping to find a clue. Suddenly, she noticed something faint in the background. She amplified the sound and heard the Solomon chant. Meanwhile, Chris had worked through the night. This time, he and Dana were less awkward, as professionalism bridged the gap. He shared his analysis with her and uncovered a financial discrepancy. They were thrilled. Dana couldn't believe it. She had spent months reviewing just 1 year's worth of ledgers, while Chris had gone through 15 years in one night. The owner's sister walked in, and Chris confidently stated that over $60 million had gone missing. She asked him to prepare a report and find out where the money had gone. Another night passed, and the CFO went to the kitchen, only to find a group of strangers in his home. The hitman boss casually drank milk and ate bread. He instructed the CFO to overdose on insulin, ensuring a dignified death. His wife and son would receive the insurance payout. However, if he resisted, his entire family would be killed. The hitman left the CFO to think it over. The next day, Chris returned to work, only to find that the janitor had erased his day's work. He quickly intervened and learned that the CFO had died unexpectedly the previous night. The owner entered the office and paid Chris for his services. He and the CFO had been friends for decades, and he knew the death wasn't an accident. It was a suicide to avoid being exposed. The owner didn't want to dig deeper. He didn't care about the $60 million and didn't want to reopen old wounds. But Chris couldn't let it go. His autism compelled him to see things through to the end. This triggered a meltdown. He parked his car but didn't fully pull into the garage. He turned on loud music and bright lights, rubbed his calves with a rolling pin, and finally threw his antidepressants against the wall. After calming down, he took his medication as scheduled. The next day, Chris went to the farm couple's house and drew smiley faces on the cantaloupes. He lay in the trunk, reminiscing about his childhood. After his mother left, his father moved 34 times in 17 years to protect his sons from bullies. His father hired various martial arts experts to train the boys rigorously. Now, danger was approaching. Hitmen arrived at the farm, knowing the accountant was there to eliminate him. Chris took out the hitmen through the wooden wall, hid in the grass, and blew up their car. A bald hitman took the elderly couple hostage and drove away with them. Just as they left the house, Chris appeared from the side, took aim, and shot, causing the car to smoke and stall. He then sprinted toward the car, startling the bald hitman. The hitman had expected his target to be just an accountant, but Chris turned out to be a top-tier assassin. Chris dragged the hitman out of the car through the rear window, and they both tumbled out. The hitman threw a knife, but Chris pulled out his belt, swiftly wrapped it around the man's neck, and performed a shoulder throw. The hitman got up and tried to choke Chris, but Chris flipped him over and demanded to know who had hired him. The hitman handed over a card, revealing that their target was actually two people. Chris suddenly realized Dana was in danger. After saying goodbye to the farm couple, he left. Chris drove quickly, calling his assistant to get Dana's address. His assistant, resourceful as ever, quickly found it. Dana had just arrived home. A strange call came in and was abruptly hung up. Chris slung a bag over his shoulder and noticed someone following Dana. They took the elevator together, but Chris had to act fast. As Dana entered her apartment, a man pushed the door open. They had brought a box to take their target away. Dana grabbed an iron rod and ran into the inner room. Meanwhile, Chris dealt with the two hitmen outside, knocking one out with a punch and performing another shoulder throw. He then grabbed a gun and fired, ensuring each shot was a headshot. Chris knocked lightly on the door, and the man inside cautiously peeked out. Just as the hitman was about to kill Dana, Chris burst in and took him down in 2 moves. He made sure to finish the job. Chris wasn't an ordinary assassin. His autism meant he had to see things through to the end, so he always made sure to deliver the final shot. The hitman boss heard the news and decided to deal with the accountant himself. Chris took Dana to the garage, where she suggested calling the police. But Chris explained that the police couldn't protect her. The missing company funds had already been covered up. Chris changed clothes in the car, and Dana followed him, stunned by what she saw next. Drawers filled with cash and gold bars, and in the next room, an arsenal of weapons neatly arranged. Chris explained that his RV was a mobile storage unit, allowing him to disappear at any time. Dana was still confused until she saw the painting in Chris's bedroom. Through the solemn enchant, Medina's friend deduced that the person she was investigating likely had autism, though it wasn't apparent from the suspect's photos. They were just like anyone else, only less communicative. Medina researched autistic savants and suddenly found a lead. Chris took Dana to a hotel, knowing that after killing several hitmen, there would be retaliation. At the hotel, Dana learned that the priceless artifacts were Chris's payment for his services. Chris left the hotel that night. His assistant couldn't understand why he was risking his life for a girl he'd just met a week ago. The assistant tracked down the owner's sister's house, but when Chris arrived, he found that a hitman had beaten him to it. Chris opened the car door, seemingly familiar with the hitman, but he was spotted. When he infiltrated the owner's sister's house, the woman was already dead. It seemed the mastermind behind everything was the company owner himself. Medina used a process of elimination to investigate accounting firms with annual revenues over $1 million. Her friend finally found one, a firm with an annual income of only $75,000. However, the firm had significant inflows from nail salons, Chinese restaurants, and laundromats, making it highly suspicious. Chris returned to the hotel and found Dana asleep on the couch. He thought back to his childhood when he was bullied at school. His father advised him to fight back or they would keep calling him a freak. Only by striking first can you avoid being preyed upon, his father said. The boy thought about it, then pushed open the car door and charged into the group of bullies. His brother joined him and together they fought back. Back in the present, Chris left a note for Dana, "Your life will be extraordinary." He then opened the door and left the hotel, seemingly reluctant to go. The investigators entered the accounting firm and were shocked to find guns and water from a prison. The entire yard was covered in surveillance cameras. It was an inconspicuous place, but it housed a rare heavy weapon. Meanwhile, the hitmen were lying in wait at the owner's house, expecting Chris to show up. The police left the accountant's home, leaving only Director Kim and Medina behind. At that moment, Director Kim revealed a shocking secret. He had known the accountant for years. Long ago, when Director Kim was just a financial crimes investigator, he had approached Francis, an accountant who had laundered money for the mob for 40 years, hoping he would testify against the mob. But one day, Francis was released from prison and lost his protection. Little Tony captured Francis and tortured him to death. Director Kim later joined a joint task force and spent 6 months surveilling Little Tony. One day, a man suddenly appeared, killed the guards outside the mob's hideout, and followed the bodies inside. He likely thought it was a mob dispute. He followed the bodies upstairs, hearing pleas for mercy, but no one was spared. Little Tony's men were all killed. The investigator realized the man was there for revenge. Suddenly, a gun was pressed to the back of his head. Raymond was terrified, thinking he was about to become the next victim. The man asked Raymond a few questions and learned that he was a mediocre investigator, often cowardly but a good father to his 2 sons, something he had never failed at. That day, the man spared Raymond, who later collapsed in tears, unsure why he had been let go. As Raymond prepared to resign, his phone rang, a call that would change his career. The woman on the phone told him that she worked for the accountant and revealed one shocking case after another. With the accountant's help, Director Kim quickly closed cases and rose to his current position. The accountant was inmate number 831 at a maximum security prison where he had met Francis, who taught him accounting over 2 years. One day, Francis stopped writing to him and the man went berserk, chasing a guard and smashing his skull with a water bottle. He then escaped from the 3rd floor, taking the water bottle with him. After his escape, he tracked down Little Tony's hideout. As for why he had been imprisoned, in 2003, the boy followed in his father's footsteps and joined the military. At his request, he and his father attended his mother's funeral. After leaving them, his mother had become a teacher, started a new family, and had 2 children. The 2 men in military uniforms were unrecognizable, so someone asked them to leave. A fight broke out, leaving 6 people seriously injured, and his father died shielding him from a bullet. Director Kim revealed that he had tasked Medina with investigating the accountant to test her abilities. He was about to retire, and the assassin accountant needed a new contact to continue working with the Financial Crimes Division. Medina couldn't accept it. She saw the accountant as just a killer. The director admitted he had struggled with it too, but had no choice. Just then, the phone rang. It was the accountant's assistant. Meanwhile, at the owner's house, the hitman boss realized he had lost contact with his sniper, Bobby. Chris had killed the sniper and taken another gunman hostage to get the layout of the house. A hitman leaned against the glass and was instantly shot in the head. Then, all the windows in the room were shattered. Even the hitman boss was unnerved. They knew they were dealing with a formidable opponent. The boss monitored the cameras and ordered his men to act. They located Chris's position and threw smoke grenades, but Chris still managed to shoot first. Chris engaged several hitmen in close combat, running out of bullets but grabbing a fresh magazine from a fallen enemy. He listened for the hitmen above to run out of ammo, then emerged to take them down. Within minutes, the outside was silent. Chris climbed onto the roof and entered from above. Though wounded, he still managed to eliminate his targets. The boss watched the monitors as 2 more hitmen confronted Chris. Chris engaged in hand-to-hand combat, dodging and firing, taking down one hitman with a clean shot. He then flipped over and faced a bald hitman. The opponent was strong, pinning Chris down and delivering a barrage of punches. Chris grabbed a grenade from the hitman's vest, pulled the pin, and shoved it into the man's bulletproof vest, locking him in a tight hold. The boss and the owner watched from the control room. The owner was frantic, but the boss was stunned. The wounded man began reciting the Solomon chant, and the boss stood up, realizing who he was. The man he had been searching for all these years was his own brother. The brother had always resented Chris for insisting their father attend their mother's funeral, which led to his death. The owner was confused as the two brothers fought just like they had as kids. In the end, Chris came out on top. The brothers sat together, and the owner was even more bewildered. Chris explained that he had always known where his brother was but had kept his distance to protect him as his clients were all mob bosses. The brothers were happy to reunite. The owner then appeared, regretting why he had hired the accountant and the hitmen. He continued boasting about his greatness. The brothers continued catching up, agreeing to meet again in a week. The case of the missing $60 million from the robotics company and the mysterious deaths of the owner and his sister were quickly solved, with the credit going to Medina. She hadn't wanted it this way but had no choice. Chris's garage was now empty. That day, she received a package, a painting of dogs playing poker. Dana noticed something odd and peeled back a corner, revealing the priceless masterpiece worth $100 million. Meanwhile, Chris drove off in his RV, starting a new life. And that is the end of the movie. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to our channel, like and share.